Everyone thought Bruce had simply disappeared, but his 8-month-old daughter seemed to know something nobody else knew. It was a freezing afternoon in December 2022 in Wakefield, England, when professional dog walker Sharon Skinner was preparing to finish her usual walk with the dog she cared for. The weather was bitterly cold, and a nearby fishing lake had frozen over. To anyone looking at it from a distance, the lake appeared quiet and solid, almost like a giant sheet of glass covering the water beneath it. But somewhere on that frozen lake, one of the dogs was about to find himself in a situation that could have ended in tragedy. Bruce, a Cocker Spaniel, had disappeared. Sharon expected him to be nearby because she knew his usual behavior and had been walking him for years. But this time, something was different. She called for him, looked around, and tried to figure out where he had gone. There was no Bruce. Then his young daughter River began behaving strangely. River was only 8 months old, but she seemed extremely concerned. Instead of simply staying with the other dogs, she repeatedly moved toward Sharon and then toward the direction of the frozen lake, almost as if she was trying to get Sharon to follow her. Sharon didn't immediately know what River was trying to communicate, but the puppy's behavior was unusual enough that she paid attention. She followed River toward the lake, and what she discovered changed the entire situation. Bruce was out on the frozen water. At some point, he had ventured onto the ice, and the ice had broken beneath him. Bruce had managed to reach a small island in the middle of the lake, but he was now stranded there, surrounded by freezing water and broken ice. The situation was dangerous not only for Bruce, but for anyone who might try to reach him without proper equipment. Sharon couldn't simply walk across the ice and grab him because there was no guarantee the ice would support her weight. If she fell through, there could have been 2 victims instead of 1. So she did the most important thing she could do. She called for professional help. The emergency call reached firefighters at Ossett Fire Station shortly after 1:30 in the afternoon. The rescue team understood immediately that this was not an ordinary animal rescue. Frozen water can be extremely dangerous, and even apparently solid ice can suddenly collapse under someone's weight. The firefighters arrived with equipment designed for this kind of situation, including an inflatable rescue sled that could be used to move safely across the dangerous surface. Their goal was simple: reach Bruce without putting another life at risk. But Bruce was frightened, cold, and confused. He had already fallen through the ice once, and now strangers were approaching him across the frozen lake. As the rescuers got closer, Bruce became so worried that he started moving back toward the water, making the situation even more dangerous. The firefighters had to act carefully and quickly. They eventually managed to reach Bruce and secure him before he could end up back in the freezing water. Slowly, they brought him across the dangerous area and toward safety. On the shore, Sharon waited anxiously, knowing that every moment mattered. And nearby was River, the tiny puppy whose strange behavior had started the entire rescue. Shortly after 2 p.m., Bruce was safely reunited with Sharon. The frightening incident was over, but the question remained: how had River known that something was wrong? Nobody can know exactly what the puppy was thinking, but her behavior had clearly drawn attention to the place where Bruce was stranded. She couldn't call emergency services. She couldn't explain what had happened. She couldn't tell Sharon in words that her father had fallen through the ice. Instead, she did what a dog can do. She noticed that something was wrong, became distressed, and repeatedly directed Sharon toward the lake. That simple behavior gave Sharon the clue she needed to find Bruce. And without that clue, the story could have unfolded very differently. Imagine for a moment that Sharon had simply assumed Bruce was somewhere nearby. Imagine that she had called his name a few more times, failed to find him, and decided that he would eventually return. Bruce could have remained stranded on that island while the temperature continued to drop. He was already surrounded by freezing water, and the longer he remained there, the greater the danger would become. But River wouldn't simply move on. She kept drawing attention to the lake. She had noticed that her father was missing, and somehow she understood that something was wrong. That is what makes this story so remarkable. It wasn't a trained rescue dog. It wasn't a police K9. It wasn't an animal taught to perform a complicated emergency procedure. It was an 8-month-old puppy reacting to something that felt wrong, and that reaction led the right person to the right place at exactly the right time. Sharon later explained that Bruce wasn't normally a dog who loved water. He might get his feet wet, but he wasn't known for wanting to swim in freezing conditions. That makes the incident even more unexpected. Somehow he had ended up on the frozen lake, and once the ice broke, he had very few options. Fortunately, the small island gave him somewhere to stand, but it was still surrounded by water that could quickly drain his body heat. The firefighters who came to his rescue knew that they had to treat the lake as a serious hazard. Their job wasn't simply to get to Bruce as fast as possible. Their job was to get to him without creating another emergency. This is one of the most important lessons hidden inside Bruce's story. When an animal falls through ice, the natural reaction can be to run toward it and try to pull it out. But frozen water doesn't care how strong or determined someone is. A person attempting an untrained rescue can easily fall through the ice too. That is why professional rescuers exist. They have the equipment, training, and experience to deal with situations that ordinary people cannot safely handle. Sharon made the right decision by calling for help rather than risking her own life. And the firefighters were able to use their equipment to reach Bruce and bring him back safely. But while the rescue itself was remarkable, the emotional heart of the story remains River. Think about what happened from her perspective. Her father was suddenly gone. The humans around her didn't immediately understand why. She couldn't explain it. She couldn't point at a map. She couldn't tell anyone that Bruce was trapped on an island surrounded by freezing water. All she could do was move between the person she trusted and the place where she knew her father was. She ran toward Sharon. Then she moved toward the lake. Then she came back. And somehow, that was enough. Sharon understood that River was trying to tell her something. The puppy's behavior became the first clue in a rescue that would eventually bring Bruce home alive. There is something deeply emotional about that because dogs don't need human language to form strong bonds. They recognize their families. They notice when someone is missing. They react when something feels wrong. And sometimes their instincts can draw our attention to things we would otherwise overlook. On that cold December afternoon, River's instincts may have made all the difference. Bruce was frightened, cold, and trapped. But he wasn't forgotten. Someone was looking for him. Someone had noticed that he was missing, and most importantly, someone had understood River's warning. When the firefighters finally brought Bruce back to shore, the danger that had started with a simple winter walk was finally over. He was alive. He had survived the freezing water and the broken ice. The people who had been worried about him could finally breathe again. And River, the puppy who had raised the alarm, had played a remarkable role in getting everyone to the right place. The incident also became a powerful reminder of how dangerous frozen lakes can be during winter. A frozen lake can look peaceful and beautiful from the outside. The surface can appear completely solid, but beneath that surface may be freezing water capable of causing serious harm within minutes. Ice thickness can change from one part of a lake to another, making it impossible to judge safety simply by looking at it. Bruce discovered that danger firsthand. One moment he was on the ice, and the next he was stranded after it broke beneath him. Fortunately, several things went right. Bruce managed to reach the island. River noticed that he was missing. Sharon paid attention to River's unusual behavior. She found Bruce. She didn't attempt a dangerous solo rescue. She called professionals. The firefighters arrived with the right equipment. And together, those small decisions created a chain of events that ended with Bruce going home instead of becoming another tragic winter rescue story. That's why this story is about much more than a dog falling through ice. It's about paying attention. Sometimes the difference between disaster and survival isn't one huge heroic act. Sometimes it's a small decision to stop and ask, why is my dog behaving like this? Sharon could have ignored River. She could have assumed the puppy was simply excited or distracted. Instead, she followed her. That decision led her to Bruce. And that is the moment that makes the entire story unforgettable. River didn't rescue Bruce physically. She didn't pull him from the freezing water. She didn't operate rescue equipment. But she did something equally important. She made sure someone discovered that he needed help. In a way, she became the alarm. She was the message that led to the rescue, and perhaps that is why this story has stayed so memorable. The smallest dog in the group helped reveal the biggest problem. Bruce was somewhere he should never have been, trapped in a place where no one would have expected to find him. But his daughter knew. She couldn't speak, but she communicated. She couldn't perform the rescue, but she found the person who could. She couldn't understand emergency procedures, but she understood that her father was in trouble. And because someone listened, Bruce got another chance to go home. Imagine the scene after everything was over. The cold afternoon was still hanging over Wakefield. The lake was still frozen. The broken ice was still there, silently showing where the danger had happened. But Bruce was no longer stranded on the island. He was back on solid ground. The firefighters had completed their rescue. Sharon had her dog back, and River's worried mission was finally over. What began as an ordinary dog walk had turned into an emergency that could have ended very differently. And at the center of it all was an 8-month-old puppy who simply refused to ignore the fact that something was wrong. We often think of heroes as people who perform extraordinary acts of courage. We imagine firefighters running into burning buildings, rescuers entering dangerous waters, or people risking everything to save another life. But sometimes heroism begins much earlier than that. Sometimes it begins with noticing. Sometimes it begins with refusing to ignore a warning. And sometimes, surprisingly, it begins with a dog. River didn't know that she was helping save her father's life. She didn't know that the people who followed her would call firefighters. She didn't know that professionals would arrive with an inflatable rescue sled. She only knew that Bruce was missing and something wasn't right. And she acted. That instinct led Sharon to the lake, where she discovered Bruce stranded on the ice. From there, trained rescuers took over and brought him safely home. The story is a reminder that animals may notice things humans miss. They may not be able to explain what they see, but their behavior can sometimes tell us that something deserves our attention. And if River had been ignored that afternoon, the ending might not have been the same. So the next time a dog suddenly becomes unusually focused on something, runs toward a particular place, or desperately tries to get your attention, remember the story of River. Sometimes their behavior isn't random. Sometimes they're trying to tell us something. On that freezing afternoon in England, one little puppy noticed that her father was in danger. She couldn't speak. She couldn't make a phone call. She couldn't cross the frozen lake. But she could run toward the person who might understand. And she did. Because River refused to ignore the problem, Sharon discovered Bruce. Because Sharon discovered Bruce, professional rescuers were called. Because the firefighters arrived with the right equipment, Bruce was brought back safely. And because everyone acted before it was too late, a frightening winter afternoon ended with something that everyone wanted to see: Bruce going home. The dog who had disappeared wasn't lost forever. He wasn't forgotten. He was waiting for someone to find him, and his daughter made sure they did. Sometimes the smallest heroes make the biggest difference. And on that cold December day, the hero with 4 paws was only 8 months old.